All right, well, we're ready to go, so let's get this thing started.
Perfect.
Well, good evening. It's I guess it's Tuesday night, so we are on Life's Co-Pilot, and it's our senior expert panel. And today I'm real excited. We got Jeff Stinson, who's an elder law attorney, who is going to be talking to us about something that, if you've done any research at all on, senior living and senior stuff, you're probably not sleeping really well at night because you're freaking out how in the world you're going to pay for it. And just got some good news for you that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not always a train. So Jeff, I'm going to have you introduce yourself, and we'll see where we can go with this.
Great. Yeah, so I'm Jeff Stinson. I am a certified elder law attorney by the National Elder Law Foundation, which is just a fancy way to say I've been tested in the area of elder law and peer reviewed, and the Supreme Court allows me to say I'm a specialist in the elder law field. Um, Specifically, I work with folks who are concerned about long-term care. How are they going to afford long-term care? And that's both with folks who are already got their foot in the long-term care door, folks that have just waited. Maybe they've rolled the dice or just said, I'm not going to think about that. And suddenly it's been thrust upon them. And they're trying to figure out how are we going to afford these exorbitant bills with the minimal resources we have, to those that are just worried about, well, if that might be something I need in the future, and how am I going to plan for that so that I'm not completely destitute at the time? And so that's kind of my bread and butter, what I do. Obviously, the key things that you hear often: estate planning, decedents estates, guardianships, trusts, powers of attorney. Those are all part of the package, but all that is themed around protecting assets from the cost of long-term care. So I'm going to focus mainly on Medicaid today. It amazes me after 27 years how often we get stuck with these myths of Medicaid. I still hear how they don't know. I've never figured out who they are, but they are going to take my house, or the nursing home is going to take things. And I have a friend who's a nursing home administrator, and that just frustrates him. He says, "You'd think I would have a full portfolio of real estate by now of all the stuff that I, as a nursing home, is going to take from folks." That's not true either. So I'm going to try to resolve some of those things today. Um, and if you like, I can just kind of jump right into it, Jim.
Yeah, go right ahead. It's a situation where you and I have obviously talked about this a lot, but it is an area that so many people do not understand. They've gone on Medicaid's website or something, or they've asked questions and they've gotten terrified because of what they've been told. Um, I know myself, I probably, in my role of, we help people downsize and sell off all their estate stuff and pack and move and all that. My probably the two biggest professionals I refer to are elder law attorneys and realtors, because I'm always finding people that are in need of those things. Because I'll ask people if they have if they have an elder law attorney, they go, "Oh yeah, I have an attorney." I go, "I didn't ask you that. Okay, I asked you if you have one that specializes in this, because the rules are very different. They change every year. You need someone that's on top of it." So I'm thrilled to have you here to kind of talk about what's current and what people need to know, rather than the myths.
Great, great. Well, so I'm going to talk a lot about the eligibility criteria for Medicaid. And then I'm going to give you some updates with the current Medicaid environment, which unfortunately isn't all that rosy, but I will even give you some tidbits of what is happening just within the last week in the Medicaid program. So I'll just jump right in.
Okay.
Why do we talk about Medicaid? I mean, there's a lot of people, well, isn't that a isn't that a program for the poor? Isn't that health insurance for the poor? And while yes, that was the original intent of the program, Congress expanded the scope since the late 1980s to a point where it has kind of become long-term care insurance for the middle class. To say it a little differently, nearly two-thirds of folks in the state of Indiana that are receiving long-term care get some assistance from the Medicaid program. So it's become a very important way to finance long-term care. It's even more important when you look at statistics and see that about 60% of people that are in a nursing home in Indiana have been there over a year. And what we're finding here, the average cost of nursing home care is creeping up to about 100 grand to $120,000 a year. Even in assisted living, we're seeing numbers between 60 to 80,000 a year. So um, it's very real. You know, a lot of folks I think still will just kind of sweep this issue under the rug, saying I'm just going to hold my breath and hope that it doesn't happen to me. But unfortunately, almost three-fourths of us are going to need some sort of long-term care before we pass. So it's not something we really can ignore.
Wasn't it in the 80s? Um, there's still a myth around, okay, but I think it started before then, where they would counsel people to get divorced so that one person could get on Medicaid and not lose all their assets for the family. And I think it was in the 80s when they decided to change that so that they didn't force grandma and grandpa to get divorced and commit fraud, and so it's but there's still people telling people to do that.
Yeah, and that's kind of where the scope expanded. Back in the 80s, it really was if I'm married and my spouse suddenly needs care, the only way I could avoid at the time to become completely impoverished was to divorce my spouse because otherwise we were going to lose it all. So that was kind of a common thing that folks did policy wise, plus, other reasons. That's why Congress come up with these new rules. Um, and I will add to it that because of those rules, I have only I can count on one hand the number of times I have recommended divorce as a strategy. Typically, staying married, we can protect much more for a married couple than we can for a divorced couple. You got to think our Indiana family law statutes presume a 50-50 split automatically. So that just doesn't bode well for most of my clients. Now, we do have a lot of folks that have retirement plans with high tax consequences that sometimes that does become appealing, but still there's usually something better we can do in those circumstances. So, yeah, advising right off the bat, go get a divorce is probably not in folks' best interest. There's usually other things we can do. So, the reason why Medicaid is often one of the reasons why, I guess I said one of the reasons why Medicaid is so confusing. And by the way, I I really do mean this when I say if they would ever get this program simplified enough that they would put me out of business, I'd be fine with that. I'd find something else to do. There's plenty of things that I would like to do outside of law, but unfortunately, I don't think they will ever be able to put me out of business. I don't know that I would recommend anybody work within the Medicaid agency, right? Indiana Medicaid agency right now without legal counsel. Um, and one of the reasons, just starting right off the bat, there are 35 or 36 potential categories, depending on how you count, different categories of Medicaid. And because there's so many different categories, each one of those has different criteria. Some have resource tests, some have income tests, some have other outside non-financial factors to eligibility. And in addition to that, there's 5 waivers that we tack on to those categories. And we're going to learn a little bit more about waivers, but just in its basic form, what a waiver is the state of Indiana going to the federal government saying, we've got some additional services we'd like to offer our Medicaid recipients or our citizens, but we don't want to offer those to everybody. We want to limit the funding or limit the dollars we assign to these services. So will you waive the requirement that every Medicaid recipient gets these services? So that's kind of the basis for a waiver. And you're going to find because of that limitation on the funding, you're often going to find that these waivers have wait lists because of the demand far exceeds the supply available. Um, Today, though, I'm going to focus, despite all those categories, I'm going to focus only on Medicaid for the aged or Medicaid for the disabled in two waivers. The Pathways waiver, Pathways for Aging waiver, which is for folks under the age of 65, or over the age of 65, excuse me, 65 and over, and the Health and Wellness waiver, which is for folks under the age of 65. And so with those categories, we kind of break eligibility down into four distinct elements. One is the person seeking services has to meet nursing home level of care. Now, that's whether you're in a nursing home or whether you're seeking these home and community based services, you have to meet that level of care. Second, your income must be less than the Medicaid income limit. I'm going to talk more about each one of these as we go on. Third, assets must be below an asset limit. And then the last thing is, you can't just give everything away and then come in the next day and say, I'm below your asset limit. There are wise to that. There are transfer rules in place to avoid folks from giving everything away and then expecting services the next day. That was part of those rules that were put in place in the 80s. That was another common thing besides divorce was people just give everything to their kids. There was no rule against that. And then they come in the next day and say, hey, I'm here for my services. So rules have been put in place to avoid that as well. So regarding level of care, if you're in a nursing home, typically that's pretty seamless. You don't see much as far as getting that assessment done. But when you are looking for home and community-based services, that assessment is done by a private contractor that the state is hired, and that contractor is called Maximus. We'll talk a little bit about some of the hiccups and issues there that's involved with that private contractor. But that's where you go if you're thinking services, say for home care, assisted living, adult daycare, or one of those other alternatives. Now, as far as the income limit's concerned, if you're seeking help in a nursing home or one of those home and community-based services, your countable monthly income has to be below a certain limit. That limit being $2,982 for this year. Now, if an individual has income in excess of that limit, not a huge ordeal because federal law tells us exactly what to do. It's one of the few things under Medicaid's rules that we know exactly what to do. And that is you have to create what's called a qualified income trust or Miller trust. And this is where we get into one of our big myths. A Miller trust is simply a mechanism to get around this income cap. It allows individuals to create a trust, which is just a document that says, I am assigning Jim as my trustee, who I'm going to give an amount of money on a monthly basis, and he's going to use it for my benefit. But when I assign this amount of my income to Jim, they're no longer considering this my income, it's the trust income. And as a result, my income gets pushed down below that income cap. So for example, if I have $3,000 in income and I put $100 each month into the Miller Trust, $100 of my income into the Miller Trust, I'm now considering to have $2,900 in income and I'm below that $2,982 income cap. So it's a safe harbor vehicle for folks to be able to get around that income cap. Otherwise, it would be a really draconian rule that says, yeah, I'm facing a $10,000 a month nursing home bill. I have $3,000 in income, but I don't qualify because I have, $18 too much in income. So that's how we get around that. My point here, though, is the qualified income trust, also known as Miller Trust, is only for income. Never can be used to protect assets. And that is a common myth. I get a lot of folks that'll say, hey, Jeff, I'm here to protect my assets. I need you to set up a Miller Trust for me. No, that's a safe harbor to get through that income cap. So,
but it's such an important piece to the puzzle because I'm thinking of a client I just had that I was counseling their POAs to get with you or one of your colleagues, okay?
mhm,
Because she had a gross income with with retirements or whatever she had, it was a little over 4,000, but her care was going to be almost 10,000. Well,
mhm.
she couldn't, you know, there's no way she's going to fit there without going into that process and getting that vehicle built.
Right, right. And that's exactly why the Miller Trust was codified into statute. That actually come from a Supreme Court case in the 90s that I met the attorney that was the lead attorney on that years ago. Um, but that's Congress thought that's a good idea, and they made it law in 1993. So that's how long that's been around. Regarding assets, though, that's the third key. So level of care, income, and assets. For a single individual, we have to be below $2,000 in countable assets. Now, I know a lot of people think, "Oh gosh, that's a very small amount." Um, well, for a married couple, it's a little more liberal. Generally speaking, you keep about half of the marital countable assets, and we're going to talk a little bit of difference between countable and exempt assets. There is a floor on that half share. So, in other words, if somebody's worth $30,000, Medicaid is not going to require you to spin down or shelter half of that 30 down to 15. There's a floor that says no matter what, we don't require folks to be under it's probably approximately $32,000. So if the two of you have 30 grand, you're done. You don't have you're below our minimum amount. There's also a maximum though. So if you're worth 500,000, you're not going to go down to 250. There's that maximum share is around 160,000. So that's where a married couple is. It's a little more liberal, but the key to planning is one of two things. We're either going to look at what are some things that we can take that count towards that asset limit that we can reinvest into something that's exempt under the program, or we are going to work within their transfer rules. And I've got an illustration for both of these. We're working within their transfer rules so that when we're finished, I'm able to protect some of my assets. Now, the transfer rules, yes, there are penalties for doing this, but generally, the way the Congress has the rules set up, you can protect about half. You may have to spend half. If you're waiting until the last minute, you may lose half, but at least you get to keep something with those rules. So I don't know if I can share.
You have a green button there underneath, I think. Well, wait a
Yep,
minute.
I can. There we go.
Yeah, there you go. Is it letting you?
I think so.
As I said, everything, all
Yeah.
my buttons on my Zoom link all look different than they did a few days ago.
So, um, so this here's an example of a exempt planning. So this is Howard and Marion Cunningham. Most people know who these two folks are, but their assets consist of a house worth about 125,000. There's a $20,000 mortgage on it. There's 10,000 in bank accounts here, 40 grand in CDs, 255,000 in a brokerage account, 15,000 in a car worth, and then some life insurance that's a term policy. So in all, they're worth about 425,000. Now, Howard's been diagnosed with dementia. He's facing a nursing home admission. Um, Facility rate, we'll just say, is about 7,500 a month. That's probably a little conservative. We're seeing probably closer to 10,000 these days with a lot of facilities. Um, Nonetheless, we're looking at, well, what can we do with this couple so Marion isn't facing a reduction in her standard of living simply because she's going to have to start shelling out thousands of dollars a month, potentially starting out thousands of dollars a month for Howard's care. So In determine eligibility, they are going to look at both his assets, her assets, and their assets initially. So that's one common myth. I often get that is, well, Howard doesn't have anything in his name. Everything is in Marion's name. Well, initially, when they determine eligibility, they're going to look both at the assets owned by the institutionalized spouse and the community spouse. But we look at, first of all, the exempt assets. Not everything counts. I've been stressing that word countable here quite a bit. The house doesn't count because Marion lives in it. The car doesn't count because Marion uses that for her transportation. The life insurance doesn't count in this example because it's a term policy and has no cash value. Now, the other things do count. They total about $305,000. So the next step is the spousal share. So I've got a typo there. She gets to have $162,660. So as a result, we've got about $140,000 in excess resources. Now, yes, we could spend all of that on care and then he would be eligible, but you don't have to. In exempt planning, we're looking at, well, what can Marion do with that $140,000 that she can use to reinvest into something that's exempt? So here's an example. Not saying everyone should go out and do this, by the way. This is just illustrative purposes only. In this circumstance, she can pay off the mortgage because the house is exempt. So why not take some of that countable cash that's sitting in the bank and use it to pay towards the mortgage? And then certain annuities, this would be we call it an income annuity or a period certain annuity, immediate annuity. It's going to start paying her payments immediately over a period of time within her life expectancy. If she takes the rest of that and invests in that annuity, she has now sheltered those excess resources. So the end result is they're still worth $425,000. It's just their portfolio looks a little different. So that's how exempt planning works. We simply look at what are the excess countable resources, and then what are some things we can do to reinvest those excess resources into something that's exempt.
Well, that makes a bit of difference in their outgo, so they're not going to be burning through all their money.
Exactly. Exactly. Exempt planning obviously works very well with married couples because we'll find here in a minute with the reason why we do a lot of transfer planning with single individuals is for married couples, we don't have to worry about estate recovery. If I'm a single individual and I have something that's exempt, when I die, Medicaid could then go to that exempt asset and say, hey, we let you have benefits while also owning that asset all this time. Now we want our money back out of that asset we let you hold. Well, in a married couple, after Howard's deemed eligible here, all the assets must be placed into Marion's name. And then at Howard's death, there's nothing for them to make a claim on. That's why exempt planning works well for a married couple. And we don't talk about making transfers. Nothing here is giving up anything. They're simply reinvesting. So different example here with transfer planning. We'll use Arthur Fonzarelli instead. He's got $150,000 in assets. His care costs are $5,500, and he's got about $2,000 in monthly income. So his shortfall is about $3,500 a month. You'll do the math there. He'll be out of money in 42 months and have nothing to his name. We can do better than that. I've kind of coined this the half and half plan. Now, when you see the numbers here, it's usually a little better than half. But what this is using the transfer rules to the benefit of Arthur. He doesn't have to give up everything because even though they penalize gifts, he can give away a portion of his assets let him penalize what he gives away, and then use the other portion of his assets to private pay through that penalty period. So it looks a little like this. Kind of look, if we kind of do a formula here, I've already done the math. If he can allocate $96,000 to his family. Now he can't keep it. He has to transfer it away. I often recommend that he transfer it away into a trust that benefits his family, rather directly to family members, simply because a trust can protect those funds from any unanticipated things that might come up in those family members' lives. We don't have to worry about someone getting divorced and half of those funds being dissipated through a divorce action, or someone, you know, getting sued and then half of those funds, or those funds being subject to a lawsuit or a creditor claim. The trust protects that. But when he allocates that 96,000, Medicaid is going to say, well, because you're giving things away, we're not going to help you for 15 months. Well, that means he's still got to have some funds around to pay through that 15 months. That's where the other 54 comes in. Now, he can't keep that 54 in a bank. He's got to turn that into a stream of income. And we can do that either by loaning those funds and having the recipient of the loan pay those payments back over 15 months, or purchasing an annuity and having those annuity payments pay back over a 15-month period of time, so that he's got his monthly income plus those payments to cover the cost of his care over the 15 months. So the result is, after 50 months, he's protected 96,000 of his 150. He's eligible for Medicaid now to cover his care costs. And his family, if they want to, and I have to stress that, his family, if they want to, has a pool of funds to be able to supplement his Medicaid benefits as he needs it. And I say if they want to, because it's not Arthur's money anymore. It belongs to the family members. And I always counsel my clients on this too. I counsel Arthur, hey, if they may go build a house in Costa Rica with this money, and there's nothing you can do about it. Now, I know you hope that they'll hold on to it and use it for you if you need it, but it's really not yours. So it's always something we have to counsel on. So that's just kind of illustrating two different types of planning: the transfer planning and the exempt planning. Now, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the current Medicaid environment and what we're going through right now. Um, just going to scroll to a different screen for me.
Do we need to do like mental health checks after this, or?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, so several things have occurred in the last year. I'm going to start with the first being the waivers. So I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation that if I want help for funds out for services outside of a nursing facility, I would like Medicaid to help me with my assisted living, or with adult daycare, or adult family care, which is kind of like a group home, or home care. Those services come through a waiver, which, if you remember what we talked about, those are programs where the state has limited the funding available for those programs. Now, for a decade, that wasn't a big deal. We had plenty of funds available to keep up with the demand. From 2013 to 2023, there was no wait for these services. And even before 2013, I can remember wait lists, but they were short. They were maybe a period of months. I was like, I want to say 6 months may have been the longest that I can remember, that I can recollect. I've been around a long time, so my memory's fading, but that's what I can recollect of the longest period of time. But in 2023, the state FSSA had figured out that they had overshot their budget by $1 billion. I'm not going to get into the reasons for that and so on, but the result was the state decided, we're going to freeze the waiver, where we're basically going to limit the funding for the waiver. So a few things happened there. One, they quit awarding slots. Two, they stopped adding slots. Their waiver plan, which how this works, it goes to the federal government. The feds say, okay, for the next 5 years, this is what you're allowed to do. Well, they had built into their waiver plan to add slots every fiscal year. And they basically said, no, we want to just cut it off and keep the same amount of slots as we've had in 2025. So 2026 is going to be the same number of slots, 2027, same number of slots, 2028, same number of slots. And so as a result, we've started to get this humongous wait list for the waivered services. And one thing that really kind of galls me is the other thing they don't do is, let's just say I was awarded a waiver slot in September, and our fiscal year runs from July to July. So I get a waiver slot in September. I use it for 2 months, and then I don't need it anymore. I go to a nursing home or I pass away. That slot remains empty until the next fiscal year. So even though they say they've got 39,000 slots, they're not using all of them because they're not refilling slots as they're being abandoned during that fiscal year. So just to kind of give you some numbers, there are a total of 39,842 pathways for aging. So those are those waiver slots for folks 65 and older. I did a presentation in October. The wait list for that program, that waiver, was a little over 7,000. I checked earlier today, the wait list is now 12,075. So we're not chipping away, we're keep adding to that wait list. The health and wellness waiver, it went from 4,300 to now 6,500 on that wait list. The state does tell us how many people they pull off the wait list every month and the last date of the person they're pulling off. So for example, in March, they said they pulled somebody off the wait list from April of 2025, which doesn't seem that bad, but there are priority positions given to people. So I really can't tell you if that person had been on there for 18 months or really had been on there, or that person should have been on there for more months, or whether they got a priority slot because something occurred within their life that allowed them to bump up higher within the list. So that's kind of a misnomer there on when they're pulling people off. The other thing that was odd, they're pulling people off at a few hundred a month. In March, they pulled off 1,000 people. Now, I don't know if that's because they're anticipating these people won't start services until the next fiscal year, which is in July, or whether they just found 1,000 slots. I don't know what that means, but we'll see if April's the same, and then maybe there's some good news there. But I don't think that's the case because they only had 2,600 slots open at the beginning of the fiscal year. So I can't imagine that there was 1,000 slots that had been unfilled with 3/4 of the fiscal year completed. Another thing I wanted to just kind of go over here is the alternatives. Now, obviously, nursing home admission is one alternative. I mentioned priority slots. So if I go into a hospital or I've been in a nursing facility for 60 days, I do get to go up to the top of the list. So that is one way to get those services quicker. And Jim, you might open your ears there, just read between the lines.
I heard it, yeah.
That's one way to go to the top of the list. Now, it doesn't mean you get a slot, but it means you're the next person waiting for a slot. So that is one thing that folks can do. There is a separate program called Money Follows the Person where they've allocated 125 slots for that. Those are folks that's been in the nursing home for 90 days. they can then get a slot. Unfortunately, those have all been used up. I noticed there was one left last month, and that one now has been used up. For veterans or surviving spouses of veterans, there is a cash program, cash benefit called pension that could be available to help offset the cost of care, particularly for assisted living and home care. So that's another alternative. A last alternative is PACE. And this is kind of a unique concept. It's a separate funding source. PACE stands for Program of All Inclusive Care for the Elderly. And this is basically this concept is an interdisciplinary team does everything together in one environment. So the core model is there's this one building that houses the patients, every all of the patient's medical needs. There are doctors there, there are dentists there, there are optometrists there, the podiatrist comes there. Everything is met within that building. And from a long-term care standpoint, the core model there is they want folks to come to the adult day center part of that. Now they do have transportation, they pick you up and they drop you off there. So you don't have to worry about getting folks back and forth. And then as someone progresses, if they deteriorate and they can't make that trip, then the PACE program does pay for home care, does cover assisted living, and then does cover nursing home care. But that is an alternative because there's no wait for the PACE program. Now, you do have to live in an area that has a PACE program that services your area. Fortunately, at least for central Indiana, there's just about every county in central Indiana is serviced by a PACE program. And many counties are serviced by a PACE program now. I think there's 9 programs now that's been established.
It's
Um,
fairly recent for the north side of Indy to have it, but
it is fairly recent for the north side of Indy, yes. The
yeah.
very first program was the St. Francis program on the south side. The St. Vincent, which services Indy and some of the outlier counties, they've been around a couple years. And but there's even like Wayne County, which is where I'm originally from. They have a PACE program over there now, so it's growing. So that is an alternative, particularly if you're on the wait list. I mean, maybe you like the concept of home care and you don't really like the thought of traveling every day to an adult day center, but it is a mechanism as a temporary thing, particularly if the person's primary caregiver has to also work.
Right.
This is a way to kind of make that happen at least until the wait list starts and you can kick in some home care there. So
Well, it sounds like a really interesting program. I had someone explain to me that even if it's so inclusive that if somebody's air conditioning went out and they could actually help with that. I mean, it's crazy stuff that they
yeah,
are doing with that. It sounds like a good program. It just it's not everything's not for everybody, but
right. Exactly. So if there's any light there, that's one thing that we could look at when to substitute for these huge wait lists. Another issue I wanted to make note of here, something else that Indiana did last year was I guess it's been over a year now, they switched to a managed care system. Prior to that, we were a fee for services system. So if I was a provider, I submitted my bill to the state and the state paid my bill. Um, they switched to a managed care system. So now a provider submits their claim to a third party, whether it's Anthem, Humana, or United Healthcare, and they pay my bill. Now, of course, the state then just pays a sum of money to those institutions to service everybody under that umbrella. The state's finally kind of looking at this, thinking, I don't know that this was a great idea. Our current Mitch Robe has even said he's the current Medicaid. I don't think he was the interim Medicaid director. I know we have a new Medicaid director now. He's the one that said, I don't know why we did this. And in fact, last week, governor signed a new law that's going to transition folks who are a long-term stay in a nursing home back to that fee-for-service model out of the managed care system. So managed care was it's still going to stick around, but some of those long-term care services are going to be put back into that fee-for-service model. So another thing that has been kind of a thorn in folks' side because it's just another layer of bureaucracy that they have to deal with. Once I'm approved for Medicaid, then I have to pick my managed care entity, and then I have to arrange for them to set up my care plan and start paying my provider. And there was a lot of other things. The providers were complaining that there was going months and months without getting paid and things like that as well. Besides the fact that a current last audit showed that it's cost the state $91 million more to
Yeah.
have this managed care system than the fee for service system they had before. So take that for what it's worth as well. Last two things I just want to go over real quickly. I had a lot of clients when the big, beautiful bill was passed, they were concerned about losing their Medicaid benefits. Am I going to lose my Medicaid benefits? For most of my clients, the answer was no, you're not going to lose your Medicaid benefits. The big, beautiful bill, most of those revisions to the program were going towards community-based Medicaid, not folks that need long-term care, but folks that need health insurance. And a lot of those requirements, we're building work requirements around getting that community-based Medicaid. So it didn't affect a lot of my clients, but I had to still reassure them that no, this isn't going to make changes. The big thing that bill changed for those clients is starting in 2027, we are going to lose a month of retroactive coverage. And what that means is if I'm otherwise eligible for benefits, so if I meet all other Medicaid criteria, when I submit my application, if I still meet that criteria the 3 months prior to my application date, I can get coverage back those 3 months. Now it's going to be 2 months starting in 2027. So that's one thing that kind of affected folks. The other thing that the state's going to have to sort out is the inability of a state to use provider taxes is now limited. And that's a huge funding source for the Healthy Indiana plan. So that's going to be an issue for Indiana to figure out. It's also cigarette taxes also funds that, but I know those provider taxes are a big funding source as well. So that's an issue there. Second current update I wanted to go over, maybe some light at the end of the tunnel here. Indiana, that bill that I just mentioned about changing some things out of managed care back to fee for service, with some other things that change, they are going to start checking eligibility more often. That's one of the changes to the bill. But part of that bill is requiring the Medicaid agency to seek permission from the feds to start a new waiver for assisted living only. So will be some time before this is in place because they have to ask permission from the feds. Of course, they have to write the waiver request first, ask permission, then implement it, and so on. But there's the possibility that we'll have a waiver just for assisted living, which I know, Jim, you and I were talking before we started here. That just makes fiscally, it makes a lot of sense for the state because it's cheaper to house folks in assisted living than in nursing home care. And, a lot of folks can successfully live in assisted living. They don't need nursing home care. And unfortunately, the
Nor do they
popular
want
thing
it.
right now, they got to go to a nursing home if they
Right.
want help.
They don't really want it a lot of times either.
Yeah,
And the cost is probably half.
right, right. That's pretty accurate.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good thing that we may be seeing here coming up soon.
Well, it's nice that they're listening to somebody. I
Yeah,
know you're down in the state house all the time.
yeah.
When, with all this stuff going on, these wait lists and all these different things that are happening out there in the industry, we talk about it on a regular basis because it's been what is it 2 years now or a little over a year when all the rules changed?
I'm
The
sorry.
pathways rules. When did those? Was that a year ago or 2 years ago? July.
Yeah, July. Yeah.
So we've all, it's obviously been a topic of conversation. What the question I'm going to have right now for you is, and I know this happens to families because it happened to our family. You get in a situation to where you're trucking along, everything's going just fine. You know, you fall off your tightrope. It could be they got sick, they fell, they had a stroke, Lord knows what, knocked them off their bicycle. They go to the hospital, then they go from the hospital to rehab, and then they're told, okay, now we'll release you on Monday, but you can't go back home. You need to go somewhere that's going to care. When somebody is on Social Security, maybe has a small pension, maybe not. What do they do now with this pathway thing? What's your recommendation? Because I know this is happening on a regular basis.
Hmm. Yeah, the first thing that really was irritating me was, if you recall, when Pathways first got, there was lots of media, lots of commercials about how great this was going to be for seniors and all these things that Pathways would do for you, but they never give the full picture of, we don't have funding for this, but here it is. Unfortunately, a lot of individuals, they wait to that defining moment, that stroke or the fall or whatnot, and then they start seeking services. And the problem is, if you want services outside of a nursing home, you're now going to be at the mercy of that wait list, which I just tell folks, right, expect 18 to 24 months. Then the next thing is, okay, well, if I got to wait 18, what am I going to do in the meantime? And I had that question posed to me in another presentation I did earlier today. What are people doing? And I said, well, they're either going to a nursing home, and that's happening a lot. And I know a lot of nursing homes are now overwhelmed because they were expecting X amount of patients, and now they're having Y amount of patients coming in. So that's one. Or two, they are becoming completely impoverished or paying as much as they can. Or we've got family members that are killing themselves trying to make this work until there's funding available to help their loved one. Um, or the last is they risk it. They muddle along and say, okay, well, I guess we'll just take them home and hope for the best, which is not the best avenue here, but I think that's happened a lot there as well. Um, I would encourage folks, though, to think about PACE if you're in that
Does
area.
PACE help with home care as well or not?
It does, but I think fiscally, for the program to work, they want folks to come into the program going to the adult daycare
Okay.
center
Yeah.
first. And then if you get to where you can't travel, then they will provide home care under
Okay.
that model.
Those are done by the insurance companies, aren't they? The hospitals, the insurance companies are.
Well, the PACE program has contracts with different providers.
Okay. All right.
St. Vincent is one of them. So, for example, in St. Vincent would have a contract with, XYZ home care services, or, Shady Pines assisted living, things like that. So,
Right. Okay. So those, I was going to say, those are one things that people are going to have to deal with. Ideally, they plan this thing out and they come see you 5 years before they need it and get everything all, doctored up and I dotted and T's crossed. But that's probably a minority of people that do that.
yeah. I will also just kind of mention the other thing that I see a lot is folks saying, okay, there's a certain amount we're willing to invest for mom and dad's care. Okay, we've invested what we've as much as we want now. Now we want to get some help. And then I'm having the discussion, you got to wait 2 years.
Right.
If that's your philosophy, start that wait list process now. Spend what you want, but get on the wait list now. So when you've exhausted the amount that you want to invest in mom and dad's care, you are now mom and dad are now coming up on the wait list, and you start getting help. Um, this comes up. I've had several family members where kids have been funding mom and dad's care, and they're getting to the point where we can't do this anymore. We're ready to get some help, thinking that we've been doing the right in their opinion, we've been doing the right thing. We've been helping mom and dad. We haven't been relying on the system, so to speak, to pay for mom and dad. Now, though, we've invested our own funds for a year. We want help. And I have
Well,
to tell them,
on
no, you
top
got
of
to invest
that,
your funds for another 2 years.
a lot of times, mom and dad, their kids are in their 60s.
That
Okay,
too.
so they're burning through the resources that they're going to need, and then it's going to be their kids' job to try to make up the difference. I mean, it keeps rolling downhill,
Uh-huh.
and that hill keeps getting bigger, somehow or another. So it's like it's a good idea to start looking at some of this stuff beforehand. And then, as you know, sometimes getting your siblings to understand what you're trying to tell them is a challenge. Okay, but it's like trying to get people to open their eyes to what's out there and what's needed. And and you said up early on, what 65% of families end up needing like some kind of a long-term care situation.
It's
You
like
know,
more like 70%. Yeah.
70%. So the odds are not in your favor that you're going to dodge that bullet.
Hmm. Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And if you've not priced out these communities, uh, it is it. If you saved a lot of money, you're going to be out of it soon.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think that's the other surprise. I know there's just some naivety around the cost of long-term care.
Yeah.
Um, you mean it's $450 a day? Really? Yeah, yeah, it is.
Yeah. It just and it then you have something else coming on top of it and something else coming on top of it. Then you need to augment the care, so that numbers that it's kind of like spinning on the wheel, so
Uh-huh. Yeah,
but it's there are solutions, but right now with this, we're kind of back to where we were before waiver came in, where all of a
it's
sudden you had
yeah.
to jump into the nursing home because that was the only option.
Yeah, I really feel like I call it going back to the dark ages. When I first started my career 20 some years ago, I had to have those hard discussions with families of, well, if you want help from Medicaid or a public benefits program, you have to admit mom and dad into a nursing facility because that was the only services at the time that Medicaid covered. We're kind of back to that now. If you want help immediately, you're going to have to admit mom or dad to a nursing facility. And
or get or get some of this stuff in. What happens if, let's say you decide, okay, I want to plan out for a couple years, so we think we can get by until then, and you get in on the list. Do you then get kicked out of the line if you don't take it when that opportunity arises? Okay, so you better be prepared for that at that time.
yeah, you really want to take it. It's a golden ticket. Once you're invited off the wait list, you want to take it. And that is something important to know. You have 30 days to make up your mind once you get invited. Otherwise, you get kicked back off. And you don't just get put back on the wait list. You have to call and start the process over again to get put back on the wait list. Um, there's also time limits to become eligible as well. So if I say, yes, I want this slot, then I have 180 days to meet to get everything accomplished to get services started. Now, that sounds like a long period of time, but in that 180 days, I have to be assessed again for level of care. I have to be approved by Medicaid financially. So I have to meet those financial criteria. I have to pick my managed care entity. I have to arrange a care plan, a service plan with my managed care entity. The managed care entity has to hire my provider. So all that has to happen within that 180 days. It's tight. So that's sort of else I don't think people realize. You've got to start immediately once you come off the wait list.
Yeah, these things don't just happen overnight. I mean, full disclosure, we use you or our family, but it's like cleaning out an estate took me forever to get all that stuff done. It's just it's not something that you just go, oh, you know, and
Right.
you get it done, but it takes a couple of hoops to jump through.
It does. Yes. Yes.
Well, I really appreciate your time on this. This is a topic that comes up often, okay, and I'm constantly sending people to you and your colleagues to go. I can tell you enough to be dangerous, but you need to talk to somebody that actually does this every day to figure out how to navigate all this stuff. So, but Well, thank you so much for sharing with us. Truly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime.
All right. Have a good one. Take
Take
care.
care.